Imagine working for months, doing your job, only to look at your paycheck and realize it's short. It's less than what the law says you're owed. So you complain, but your boss just points a finger at their client. And guess what? The client points right back. So who's actually on the hook to pay you? We're going to dive into a real-life legal fight that settled this exact question.
This is the big question, right? When you're hired by, say, a contractor or an agency to do a job for another company, you create this kind of complex web of responsibility. If your direct boss, the agency, can't or just won't pay you the right wage, where's that money supposed to come from? Well, this case we're looking at sets a huge precedent.
All right, so let's meet the players in this story. On one side, you've got 19 security guards. On the other side is their direct employer, a company called Alpha Investigation and Security Agency. We'll just call them ASA. And then, caught right in the middle, is the agency's client, the Don Mariano Marcos State University, or DMSU, which is where these guards actually went to work every day.
Now this number is really what started it all. The guards were getting a monthly salary of just 900 pesos. Now, even way back in 1990, this was way below the legal minimum wage. And that discrepancy sparked a fight that would climb all the way to the nation's highest court.
So how did this whole thing kick off? Let's go back to the very beginning, to that initial complaint.
The basic facts are pretty straightforward. You have these 19 guards, they're employed by the security agency ASA, and their job was to protect the university campus. They realized they were being underpaid, so they did something about it. They filed a formal complaint with the Department of Labor, and they didn't just name their agency, they named the university too.
And this is where the blame game really gets going. The security agency, to their credit, actually went to the university and said, hey, the minimum wage went up. To pay our guards legally, we need to increase our contract price. But the university just shut them down. They said, sorry, budgetary constraints. That refusal is what turned this from a simple problem into a huge legal battle.
So with nobody willing to budge, the complaint started its long, slow journey up through the legal system.
And let me tell you, this was not a quick trip. The whole thing starts in 1990. It takes 2 full years for the labor arbiter to make a ruling. A year after that, it gets appealed to the National Labor Relations Commission. And then, finally, a full 7 years after those guards first filed their complaint, the case lands on the steps of the Supreme Court.
And here's the kicker. At every single level, the decision was exactly the same. From the very first ruling all the way up through the Labor Commission, the answer was consistent. Both the security agency and the university were found to be solidarily liable, which is a legal way of saying each one of them was 100% on the hook for paying those guards their missing wages.
But even after losing at every single turn, the security agency just wasn't ready to throw in the towel. They took their case to the Supreme Court with one last, very specific argument.
So you gotta be wondering, what could they possibly argue after all those defeats? Well, the agency decided to zero in on a very particular interpretation of one law, just hoping, the highest court in the land might see things their way.
Okay, here it is, the heart of the legal fight. The agency, ISA, argued that this one law, the Wage Rationalization Act, meant that only the client, in this case the university, had to cover the costs of wage increases. They were trying to split hairs, basically saying, okay, the base wage is our problem, but any new increase from the government is their problem. But the court kept pointing back to the much broader Labor Code, which says, nope, for all wage payments, the agency and the client are in it together.
And that brings us to the key legal idea that really decided this whole thing, this concept of solidary liability. Let's break down what that actually means because it's super important.
Put simply, solidary liability is like a shared ironclad promise. It means if 2 people owe you money, you don't have to chase after party A for their 50% and then go chase party B for their 50%. No. You can go to either one of them and legally demand the full 100% of what you're owed.
So here's how it works in the real world to protect a worker. Let's say your agency doesn't pay you right. Instead of being stuck, the law gives you 2 different doors to knock on to get your money, the agency's door and the client's door. And here's the best part. Whichever one pays you can then go argue with the other one to get reimbursed. The worker doesn't have to wait for them to sort out their mess.
And the Supreme Court was crystal clear about why this rule exists. It's not just some random legal jargon. This whole idea of solidary liability is baked right into the Labor Code on purpose. It's meant to be a safety net, to make sure workers have the absolute best chance of getting the money they've rightfully earned.
So, keeping that powerful principle in mind, let's get to the final word from the Supreme Court. What was the verdict?
After 7 long years, the fight was over.
The Supreme Court completely dismissed the agency's appeal. They upheld what every single lower court had already decided. The agency, ISA, and the university, DMSU, were both, together, fully responsible for the guards' unpaid wages.
And this quote from the decision really explains the logic perfectly. The court said, look, the contractor, the agency, is obviously the direct employer, but for the purpose of protecting wages, the law also makes the client an indirect employer. It's that dual responsibility that provides what the court called ample protection.
But the court added one last really critical point. It said that while both are on the hook to the worker, the law fully intends for the ultimate cost of wage hikes to fall on the principal, or the client. So the client is expected to adjust the service contract to cover these legally required costs. They can't just say, "Not my problem."
So you see, this case from decades ago has a massive impact today. The next time you're at your office, think about the security guards at the front desk, the janitorial staff, the maintenance crew. They might be wearing a uniform from a different company, but this ruling confirms that the place where they physically work also has a fundamental responsibility to make sure they're paid fairly. It's this hidden connection that ensures everyone, hopefully, gets what they've earned.